When his best friend is hired to face the most feared fighter in the world, an ex-con who specializes in martial arts travels to the other side of the planet to prepare him for this duel. Today we're going to recap the story of the 2016 movie, Never Back Down, No Surrender. Case Walker is a talented MMA fighter who hasn't been beaten in the ring for several years. During a fight with Shelton, he is instructed by his trainer to take it easy on his opponent, otherwise no one else will have the courage to face him. So Case waits until the third round to secure his victory, as he could knock his opponent out in the first few seconds of the fight. After the bout, the fighter meets up with an old friend called Brody, who also makes a living in the ring. Despite being married to a beautiful woman and having 2 children, Brody is a pickup guy and cheats on his wife all the time during business trips. That night, when he goes to meet his friend, Case meets Micah, one of the publicists at PFC, a company that manages Brody's career. While the fighters talk, Brody reveals that he has signed a contract with Primordial Combat and will have to face Caesar Braga in a few weeks' time in Thailand. Upon hearing this, Case becomes worried, as he knows that there are rumors that Braga is a psychopath and has become famous for his extreme aggression. At this point, Brody asks Case to help train him and says he will pay a large sum of money for his services. After refusing the offer, Case leaves and sees some men trying to surround Brody. One of them claims that the fighter is kissing his wife and goes after him. Immediately, Case goes to defend him and hits his opponent. He then accompanies Brody back to the hotel, as he is completely drunk. The next morning, the fighter once again asks his friend to help him train for his next fight and Case accepts the challenge. A few days later, Brody returns home, but soon has to say goodbye to his family to travel to Thailand. After a long journey, Case finally arrives at his final destination and can rest while Brody attends a press conference with his opponent. Hugo Vega, the CEO of PFC, introduces the 2 fighters to the journalists and says that they are going to have an epic fight. At that moment, a reporter called Joe speaks up and asks about the report of physical aggression made by Braga's ex-wife. Upon hearing this, the fighter becomes furious and totally out of control. To prevent Joe from being attacked, the security guards have to band together and hold Braga down until he calms down. After the interview, Brody goes to the bathroom and sees his opponent destroying everything around him. At this point, he begins to worry, as he has never faced such an aggressive opponent before. After a few hours of rest, Case goes to the gym where his friend will be training for the fight and meets Matty Ramos, the guy who has officially been hired to be Brody's trainer. Despite having a salon equipped with the best training instruments, Case decides to go to the nearest dump to pick up old materials and assemble makeshift equipment. With a few planks of wood, old tires, bottles and several pounds of stone, he builds rustic equipment that draws the attention of all the other fighters. Seeing the rookie training in a way he considers totally old-fashioned, Cobra starts laughing and does everything he can to get him off his back, but Case doesn't give in to his taunts. Suddenly, Brody appears and the fighters discover that Case is there to train him. At that moment, Cobra challenges him to a fight and they both enter the ring. Everyone is eager to see the outcome of this duel and is convinced that Cobra will be the winner. However, the man is unable to land a single punch on his opponent and is quickly knocked down by him. At that moment, Case takes the opportunity to put into practice all the moves he has been training since he arrived at the gym and Cobra ends up being knocked out. Concerned about the health of one of his greatest fighters, Matty enters the ring and tries to revive him, but decides to send Cobra to the hospital soon after. Every morning, before he even has his coffee, Case does his cardio and runs a few kilometers with the aim of improving his fitness. That day, Brody is 2 hours late for his training and receives a scolding from Matty. When he finally starts training, Vega and his men show up accompanied by Micah. The businessman is looking for Case and says he was impressed by his performance during the fight that left Cobra with 3 broken ribs. He then offers Case a place in a fight and claims to be there to evaluate his performance in a live duel. However, the fighter refuses the offer and Vega leaves in frustration. Before leaving the gym, he is approached by Taj, who asks for an opportunity to show off his fighting skills. Immediately, the young man is ignored, so Case offers to be his opponent in order to give him the opportunity to attract the businessman's attention. However, during the fight, Case only defends himself and doesn't even try to attack him. At this point, Vega can see the young man's poor performance and leaves before the fight is even over. After their disgraceful performance, Taj and his friend go to Case for help in improving their fighting skills, and the fighter says he will only be available when he has finished his own training. Hours later, Case is getting ready to leave. It's night outside and he believes the boys have already gone home. However, to his surprise, the fighter discovers that the youngsters are right there waiting for him and he has no choice but to keep his promise. A few minutes later, the hall is empty and the three of them are the only ones still training. Case explains that, in martial arts, every part of the fighter's body is trained to be used as a weapon. To do this, they need to perfect their technique more and more in order to achieve maximum results with minimum effort. After showing the pair all the moves they need to practice, Case leaves and returns to the studio the next morning. That day, Brody receives some reporters for an interview, but Case ends up stealing the show and becomes the center of attention. The man is doing his daily exercises when a journalist recognizes him and reveals that everyone believed he had perished in prison because, since his arrest, no one has heard from him. At that moment, Micah appears and manages to turn the media's attention to the fighter, as she needs to get Brody's name all over the internet before the fight. Later, when the journalists leave, the woman approaches Case and invites him to lunch the next day. As he hasn't been on a date for a long time, the man asks Taj and Creech to help him choose an appropriate outfit for the occasion. Before leaving, the boys advise their coach to take flowers to Micah and he decides to stop at a flower shop he finds on the way to the restaurant. Just then, Morgan approaches him and helps him choose a beautiful bouquet. What Case didn't realize was that the little girl was Micah's daughter. When the girl's nanny appears, the publicist says goodbye to her daughter and walks over to the table next to Case. A few meters away is Maddie, who watches the couple while smoking a cigarette. While the two talk, Maddie and Brody have a meeting with Vega. The manager says he's heard rumors that his fighter isn't dedicating himself to training and reminds Brody of what's at stake if he loses the fight against Braga. During a relaxed conversation, Micah decides to delve a little deeper into the life of her new suitor and asks why he was arrested. As she has a young daughter, the woman tries to be cautious about the people she brings into her life and decides to investigate Case's background. However, the man doesn't like being questioned at all and decides to abandon his date. After the meeting, Maddie tells Brody that he saw the two lovebirds together that day and the man is furious, as he has always been in love with Micah and the woman has never given a damn about him. The next day, Brody is still upset about his jealousy and when Case shows up at the salon, he invites him to a fight. However, as soon as he enters the ring, the fighter realizes that something is wrong and tries to talk to his friend to find out what happened. Even so, Brody ignores him and continues the fight. In the first few seconds, Case only tries to defend himself against the blows, but decides to go on the attack when he realizes that his friend is not open to argument. In an attempt to immobilize him, Brody wrenches his opponent's arm, but Case soon manages to break free and pummels him. When they both get up, he hits some kicks on Brody and then uses a sequence of punches to knock him down. Seeing his fighter being beaten, Maddie decides to intervene and separates the two. At that point, Case realizes the mistake he made and apologizes for what happened. That same day, Vega is informed about the fight and is furious to discover that Case has defeated yet another of his greatest fighters. So he orders his aide to investigate the man's life and gather all the information he can about him. The next morning, after taking his morning shake, Case goes to the park to continue training Taj and Creech. While the boys go up and down the stairs in an unconventional way, the wrestler spots Micah and goes to talk to her. The woman then reveals that she went there to apologize for what happened during lunch and says that it was a totally inappropriate question. Before leaving, she says that she would like to go out with Case again, if he is still interested. After a full day of training, Case invites Brody to dinner at one of the food stalls outside the gym. While waiting for his order to be ready, the two friends talk and Brody confesses that he is very worried about the fight against Braga. He then apologizes for what happened the day before and reveals that he acted that way out of jealousy. The fighter has known Micah since they were both young and has always had a platonic crush on her. Although he has expressed his feelings several times, the woman has never given him the chance to get close. Then, when he heard that Case had met her, Brody felt angry and wanted to take his frustration out on his friend. Now that they have worked things out, the two train together again and Brody decides to follow the traditional fighting methods proposed by Case. As well as using rudimentary equipment to increase his strength and perfect his blows, Brody analyzes his opponent's movements in previous fights and Case helps him prepare to block Braga's blows. Meanwhile, at the gym, a fragile-looking young woman is training alone on a punching bag when she sees Creech taking a beating in the ring. During the fight, the young man is barely able to defend himself against his opponent's blows and is humiliated in front of all his colleagues. Then, at the end of the battle, Jija enters the arena and shows all her skill by easily knocking out a guy twice her size. By the end of the fight, it's clear to all the fighters that strength isn't the only factor that interferes in a duel. At the weekend, Case invites Micah on another date and, this time, the couple manages to have a good time without any tension. They talk openly about their past and Case discovers that Micah is a widow. On the other hand, the fighter has never married or had children. After dinner, he takes the woman home and Micah reveals that she left her daughter with the nanny that night. She then asks if Case needs to train the next morning and he says yes. As he walks back to the hotel where he is staying, the fighter realizes the mistake he has made and is furious with himself for passing up the chance to have Micah's company that night. The other day, while Case is preparing his morning shake, someone knocks on his door and he hopes that Micah has come to visit. However, on the other side is one of Vega's advisors, who has gone there to deliver a contract to the fighter on behalf of his boss. Case is being invited to fight for the PFC, but makes numerous notes while reading the paper. Hours later, Vega is in the middle of an important meeting when Creech appears with an envelope in hand and returns the contract to the manager at the request of his coach. When he reads all the demands made by Case, Vega feels challenged by him and orders his advisor to convince the fighter to take part in a fight. After a warm-up run, Brody and Case arrive at the gym and see all the other fighters gathered around a laptop. They seem to be impressed by something and Case soon discovers that the video they recorded of him knocking down several policemen with his hands cuffed is making the rounds on the internet. A few years ago, he was wrongly framed by a policeman who planted a firearm in his trailer. While Case was handcuffed, the guard tried to hit him with his truncheon, but the fighter managed to dodge and used his legs to knock down all the police officers who tried to restrain him. After that, he was tried and had to serve a few years in prison before regaining his freedom. With only a week to go until the fight between Brody and Braga, Vega discovers that tickets are still far from sold out and comes to the conclusion that MMA fans aren't interested in this fight. The problem is that the manager has already invested a lot of money in the tournament and his only chance of making a profit is to find another fighter to replace Brody. As Case went viral on the internet recently, he is the most suitable opponent to face Braga, as all the fans will be euphoric to watch the duel between the two live. The next morning, as he is about to leave the hotel, Case is surprised by journalists who are waiting to interview him. Just then, Micah appears and claims to be the fighter's press officer. Knowing that the reporter's intention is to tarnish Case's image in the media, the woman says he won't be interviewed and takes him away from the spotlight. Micah then accompanies the fighter to the house where he will be staying for the rest of his stay in Thailand and says that this is a gift from Vega. Immediately, Case realizes that the manager is doing this to convince him to sign the contract. However, Micah says that her boss doesn't expect anything in return for this favor and is only repaying all the help Case has given Brody. At this point, the couple kiss and, a few hours later, Case arrives at the gym. He is surprised to see that his friend is training with another guy and asks Maddie who that man is. According to him, Boris was sent by Vega to help Brody strengthen his legs for the big fight, which will take place the following week. However, during training, Brody ends up injuring himself and Boris claims that it was the fighter who moved the wrong way. After being assessed by a doctor, Brody discovers that it will take 2 months for his knee to recover and, as a result, he won't be able to take part in the championship. Now that Brody no longer needs training, Case is preparing to return to the United States. He is packing his bags when he receives a visit from Vega and the businessman offers him $1 million to fight Braga. If he signs the contract, Case will receive a check for $500,000 and the other half of his payment will be made immediately after the fight. Faced with this excellent opportunity, the fighter is unable to refuse the offer and, that same day, the news that he will be Braga's new opponent spreads throughout the media. With just a few days to go until the tournament, Case starts training hard and receives Brody's full support. Over lunch at Micah's house, he learns that Vega is putting his money on this fight. The businessman was afraid that Brody would lose to Braga, but now that Case is his new fighter, he's more confident than ever. Upon hearing this, Case begins to suspect that Vega hired Boris to injure Brody during training and asks for Maddie's help to keep him occupied while he goes to investigate his locker. After destroying the lock, Case takes the cell phone from Boris' bag and checks his message history. After finding the proof he needs, he goes to confront the fighter and manages to unmask him by showing everyone the message he sent to Vega 10 minutes after Brody injured his knee. Now that he knows it was all a setup, Case begins to think of a strategy to harm the businessman and make him pay for what he has done. To do this, he needs to step up his training routine in order to have a guaranteed victory against Braga, as this is also part of his revenge plan. Case's biggest challenge is fighting according to MMA rules, as the style of fighting he is used to doesn't involve gloves and punching bags. However, Brody helps his friend to familiarize himself with this new sport, and when the big day finally arrives, Vega is overjoyed. He celebrates the fact that all the tickets for the fight have been sold out and says that, if everything goes as expected, his company will make $30 million that night. Before the fight starts, some fans can access the VIP area to talk to the fighters. At this point, Jija introduces herself to Creech in a more appropriate way, as they have never had the opportunity to talk at the academy. Tony Jaa, a famous Thai actor and martial artist, also shows up to honor Case and claims to be a big fan of the fighter. With just 20 minutes to go, Case comes out of the dressing room and goes after his opponent. He interrupts Braga's training session to ask him about his ex-wife's accusation of assault against him. This is just Case's strategy to provoke his opponent, and his goal is successfully achieved. Before they even enter the arena, Braga attacks Case and the fight takes place away from the public eye. As he is much bigger and stronger than his opponent, Braga starts the fight with a big advantage and lands several punches on Case, who tries to arm wrestle the psychopath. However, Braga manages to free himself and, with a single blow, knocks his opponent down. When he gets up, Case hits back and lands several punches to Braga's face. However, after being hit in the lower parts, the fighter is weakened by the pain and can no longer react to attacks. He then stays on the ground for a few minutes to recover and removes his gloves before continuing the fight. In doing so, Case is able to use the fighting style he has truly mastered and immobilize his enemy with a single punch to the ribs. After that blow, Braga can barely move, let alone block his opponent's attacks. When he realizes that the man can no longer take the fight, Case kicks him in the head and Braga collapses to the ground. At the end of the fight, Vega approaches him and says he's going to sue Case for violating his contract. What he doesn't expect is that the fighter has managed to gather incontrovertible proof that his manager paid Boris to cause Brody's injury. If this evidence is taken to court, Vega will have to pay Brody a large sum in damages and will suffer even more harm. At this point, the advisor approaches and informs his boss that they will have to return all the money they raised from selling tickets for that fight. In the end, Vega suffered even more damage than he would have if Brody had lost the duel against Braga, and Case was able to avenge his friend. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps.